All right, well, welcome to Quentin, our Aiki author of the day. We're really thrilled to have you here, Quentin. And I'd like to start with can you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, so I'm based in the UK. I've been practicing Aikido for about 40 years. I started in Ki Aikido. In the end, with my brother, we founded an organization called Aikido for Daily Life because kind of that's why I practice. That's what I think it's about. Um, and I've spent quite a few years now working with Aiki Extensions, which is an extension of that Aikido for daily life idea.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
All right, well, you are also an author, right?
Kind of. It's a stroke author.
Yes, and actually, we're here today to discuss your book that you published called A Way to Reconcile the World, and the subtitle is Aikido Stories from Everyday Life.
Correct.
Um, in the book, I think it's fair to describe it as a collection of stories from Aikido practitioners that talk about the impact of Aikido either on their own life or on the life of a student. Is that a good summary?
Yes. I've always found Aikido books a bit unhelpful in the sense that I don't really think you can learn Aikido from a book that much. So the idea of explaining to people why they might want to learn Aikido in reality did appeal. And I think that's what that book does, is it inspires you to think that maybe this is worth putting in all those hours on the mat.
Okay. So speaking of inspiration, that's what this book does, but what was the actual spark that inspired you to begin the book in the first place?
Okay, so here's a funny story, which is in the book. As a member of the board of Aiki Extensions, we wanted to get more members. So we agreed we'd have a campaign and we would offer a prize to people who join that particular month. And a lady in near San Francisco, Two Rock, that sort of area, won me. And my prize was to either give a private lesson or to run a seminar. And I said, well, private lesson could be a bit impractical given that you're on the other side of an ocean, uh, but you're very welcome to come to me if you want. And her sensei was Richard Sozi Heckler.
Okay.
And I thought probably it was a bit inappropriate to suggest I give a seminar at his dojo, to be frank.
Mhm.
Um, and she said, well, actually, what I would really like is if you came across to me, and then what we'll do is we'll go around and see all the local teachers who I've been wanting to see for ages, and you'll be my gateway to go and see them because of your rank. And I said, hang on, what did you just say? I thought you were supposed to be getting a prize, not me. But anyway, she said that's what she wanted to do. And actually, she funded my flight by using her air miles. And I went and stayed in her house and we became very good friends. And we did exactly that. We toured around all the local dojos and great teachers that are in that area.
Mhm.
I met Jamie for the first time in the flesh. We saw Wendy Palmer and Robert Frager and practiced at Frank Duran's dojo. He wasn't there on the night, but we did this kind of thing. And Bob Nadeau, I could go on.
Mhm.
Uh, and one of the visits was to see Bob Frager. And we were just chatting. And he said, such a shame that someone doesn't collect all the stories about Aikido because, it would be good. And I said, well, actually, I'll do that. And so the project began.
Okay. Wow. I imagine you two were probably sharing stories when that idea came up.
I think we probably did talk about the story. About the story on the train. I've forgotten his name now. The original Aikido story that so many people know. Is it one of the American originals?
Terry Dobson.
Fairy story,
Nice
yeah.
to read it.
Hmm.
So I knew that story was out there and I'd read it myself, and I did write to his wife and say, could I use it? And she was delighted and said, yes, I could. And that was the first story in the book because it's the first sort of Aikido story that so many people have heard.
Okay.
What I add to that collection after that.
And I just want to say, for the sake of our audience who may view this video later on, if you want to read the story, you have to buy the book.
Because it all
Then you,
funds like extensions. Doesn't come.
um, Rob, can you show us a picture of the book? I know you have it there, or the cover. There it is.
You
Hold it
can buy
come
Amazon.
closer to the camera. There we go. Aikido Way to Reconcile the World. And where can people buy this book if they are interested?
But you can buy it on Amazon or approach Aiki Extensions or me directly, and I can supply copies.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so you went on this whirlwind tour of California. You gathered a bunch of stories. Where else did you go for stories?
Well, once I got home, I started just posting on Facebook and wherever I could, asking for stories.
Mhm,
And gradually, over maybe a 12-month period, they all came in. And they did come from around the world. Obviously, I spoke to friends and my network of Aiki contacts, but they did come in from around the world. And what was so nice was that some of the stories were from the great and the good, very, very well-known teachers.
mhm,
Uh, and others came from people who literally done Aikido for a few months, maybe, but something inspiring had happened, and it was because of what they'd done on the mat. And I just thought that was glorious. That gave hope to everybody. You didn't
mhm.
have to do it for 30 odd years before it might be useful. You could actually do it just in one lesson, and something might happen that changed for you.
Mm, yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so can you share a story from the book? One of your favorite stories, or a story that stands out in your mind?
Well, my favorite story is actually Paul Linden, who's listening into this call but isn't here, where he talks about he suffers from Parkinson's.
Mhm,
Um, I'm not sure suffers is quite the right word, really. It's something that he totally accepts and is part of who he is.
mhm,
And he talks about making ukemi with Parkinson's. So it was a positive driver rather than, oh my God, I'm going to the dogs. And I just thought that was incredibly inspiring
mhm.
uh, and beautifully written. And because he's a friend and someone I admire, it meant a lot to me.
Okay. Um, I wonder if how many people here that are listening have read this book? Everybody. We've all read the book. Um, just curious if you, Richard or Jamie or Rob, you have any comment about how the book affected you.
I certainly, I mean, I was familiar with Terry Dobson's story, which is one of the ones, featured in the book, which is so moving. And to be fair, people can find that online
Okay.
under a kind word, turneth away wrath. You don't have to buy the book to get Terry Dobson's story.
Harry
Uh,
Dobson's Tokyo Train story.
yeah. Um, and that story is one that I've told a lot to my students. I particularly like Richard Strozzi Heckler's story of soldiers who'd had training with him in Iraq, taking a knee as a funeral procession goes by and showing respect and having much better outcomes for months following
Mhm,
under, you know, extraordinarily tense circumstances.
mhm,
And how the power of respect, to solve things. And Jamie and I, as it turns out, have a lot to do with, you know, um, thinking about how one might make progress in the Middle East, and not in Iraq in this case, but in Israel and Palestine. And that is overwhelmingly the first and most potent response I can think of, which is bring respect into the conversation, because
mhm,
that's clearly missing. Um,
mhm,
and a lot of what is core to Aikido
mhm.
is respecting the other person's humanity, even while they're trying to attack you. Right.
Yeah.
Uh, and there were a bunch of other stories that were great, and as Quentin said, stories of people who'd been training for a couple months.
Mhm.
yet it impacted their ability to deal with a intruder in the classroom who was, not quite, in their best place, and everything was peacefully resolved instead of, I mean, not just an intruder in the classroom, an intruder with a knife in the classroom, if I recall.
Yeah.
And everyone ended up not being hurt, and that's, it's powerful stuff, Aikido.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I know the book was very, very inspiring to me as well. I was just telling Quentin before we began this recording that I have to also give a talk today, and I was feeling a little like I was missing my muse as I was trying to put it together. And then I started reading the stories in this book. It was so inspiring, and all of a sudden it just sort of opened the floodgates. It really is a very, very moving collection of stories. But I understand, Quentin, that you would like to write another one of these.
Yeah, that I think is the plan. I don't think there are just 80 Aikido stories out there. I think there are a lot more out there.
Yeah.
And I'd like this to be a series. I like it to be an ongoing project. So yes, I'm on the way to putting book 2 together. To be honest, it stalled a little while ago, and I'm hoping this will kickstart it. But yes, I'd like stories of how Aikido affected people off the mat. And it's amazing. They range, the first collection literally range from maybe just a paragraph to quite a few pages. And people always say to me, well, how long should the story be? And I said, well, how long's the story? So, obviously, I didn't want to write a book then to write a book, but most of them could get it done in a good few pages.
Right.
And some kind of wrote it themselves and wrote it pretty much perfectly. Others, we worked in partnership to get it to be the story they wanted it to be. And for others, I almost completely rewrote it. I got a sense of what they were trying to say and rewrote it. And then they say, yes, that's what I meant to say. And it was quite an interesting exercise, because I had to try and establish what sort of editor people wanted me to be. So it was kind of Aikido in action, because some people really didn't want me to interfere at all. And others, wanted me to really hold their hand and guide them through the process.
So it sounds like you're willing to do all of the above for anyone who would care to send you an Aiki story.
I would.
Go ahead, Richard. You have a question?
More of a comment that and you just brought it up, was one of the things that I enjoyed about the book, Quentin. The first one was, and all the stories that you were just mentioning, Robert, and and it really came at a good time when it landed in front of me. And I forget when it landed in front of me, but I remember thinking like, okay, wait, I'm trying to take all this stuff off the mat, and you hear little bits and pieces, and you hear stories and you hear the things, but for some reason sitting down with a book and being able to walk around and hearing these stories, from these other people, it just kind of hits home a little more, and it makes this book a lot different than all the other Aikido books that I had. And I think, based on what you were just saying in terms of how you edited it, I wouldn't say, I think you did a great job, because I wouldn't have guessed that you played such a large role in editing, because everybody's voice really came through. And that was one of the powerful parts for me, is I felt like, oh, these are each of these people's like real stories. And this is from their hearts, and they're sharing this with me. So it's, yeah, I can't say enough about it, but yeah, well done. And looking forward to the next one.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Richard.
I would piggyback on that. Looking forward to the next one. I mean, the book itself, as we're saying, I mean, every story is really quite different, and it's an opportunity for people to really share what Aikido means to them and how they are using Aikido in their lives. I was a contributor to the first one. My mother had Alzheimer's for about the last 10 years of her life. Brilliant woman. And so I wrote about Aikido and Alzheimer's, because early on, we were getting in a conflict, our family, with her. And when I realized that, we just really need to blend and go with what does that mean? And that, you know, her mind shrunk, her body shrunk, but her heart and her spirit didn't shrink, which for me was the key, you know, the energy, her life energy and her love. So, you know, and so I wrote about that, Aikido and Alzheimer's, which has been, you know, I think a really important kind of idea that's helped a lot of people in dealing with their elderly parents, or, you know, people having, you know, those kinds of issues. So, you know, I think that the second one, that a second one is coming, I really would emphasize for people what an opportunity it is to share experiences that they've had. And so many people, regardless again of rank and time on the mat and all that stuff, that really doesn't matter in terms of the applicability of Aikido and people finding how valuable it is. So I'm excited that the second one is, I'm not sure how far along we are, Quentin. I know we're talking about it for a while, but I'm really excited that there will be another one in a series.
I've got about half the stories I need. So another 40 odd stories would be great. If it's more than 40, then we're on for volume 3.
Okay, so you're looking for 40 additional stories
About that, I would say.
about that, yeah. Okay.
I think what was quite surprising about the first book was you wouldn't have believed some of the topics that it would cover. You know, so yes, occasionally it was somewhat about, you know, being attacked by 5 people and how they beat them all off, but it very limited number that talking about things like that. I mean, one of the stories is about how it helped a person who's a professional pianist be a better professional pianist. And well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Aikido should sort of touch every part of your life, and you can use it in anything. So it was nice to see that people were using it in anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I myself didn't start Aikido until I was 46 years old. So I had lived, you know, quite a few years without Aikido before I ever found Aikido. And I also was already on the human development healing path, you know, personally and professionally before I ever found Aikido. But I was also struck in my Aikido journey by, you know, it's a mind-body practice, and I noticed the changes on both levels, right? I have stories about things that happened to me just physically that I wouldn't have handled the same way before Aikido. That, you know, it's like, wow, that was cool.
Sounds like you've got a story to write for me then.
Yeah.
I think
39 to go.
I think you beat our founder, Don Levine, Aiki Extension's founder, Don Levine, onto the mat by 2 years. I think he started at 48.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a little different when you're not a bouncy 19-year-old starting the art.
And
I see Paul.
the appreciation for Aikido's application in life, in daily life, is
Absolutely.
readily there with a few extra years on our bodies.
Definitely, yeah. The impact of, I mean, as an emotional intelligence professional walking onto the mat, like my mind was just exploding with the parallels between what was happening physically and what happens between people in relationship on the mental, emotional level. Just really amazing. And but the stories of transformation that are in the book, it just makes you feel recommitted to your Aikido practice, doesn't it? And, you know, it makes you ask yourself, have I been digging as deeply as I could when I hear these stories of transformation? Am I, you know, forgetting about how powerful this is? Because, you know, you've all had the experience. You remember what it was like to be a day one beginner. And then you remember what it's like now, and what you forget that you've already learned when you're trying to teach a beginner. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot I always turn my palm up. Right.
I think I do a thing called verbal Aikido as well. And so that's dealing with conflict in the verbal realm as opposed to somebody trying to grab your wrist or punch your head off or whatever. And it's, although they're following exactly the same principles, it's interesting how one sometimes inspires the other and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think if you're only practicing Aikido on the mat and you're not trying to make those links to how it can help you in your daily relationships, how you conduct yourself in business,
Mhm.
everything really. You're just missing on so much of what Aikido can offer you. I
Mm.
mean, that's why the book's called A Way to Reconcile the World, because I think it is a tool that can make a big difference in the world if people practice the ideas. They don't
Mhm.
have to come to the mat. What we have to do is take those ideas off the mat.
Mm. Anybody want to ask Quentin any questions about the book or any further comments you want to offer about your experience with Aikido?
That would
All
be
right.
no.
Rob, you're muted.
One comment that occurs to me is that it can be hard to extract a moment when Aikido influenced your life when you sort of think that Aikido is your life.
Mm.
I mean, it would be much easier to list the moments when Aikido didn't have an impact, because those are far fewer
Mm.
than, you know, the amount of time that it did. And that certainly you know, doesn't make somebody better or more pure or more important or anything. It just, if you do come across Aikido and it's a compatible thing for you, and you come across it, you know, as a college student, the way I did, it shapes everything afterwards.
Mm.
I mean, fundamentally, Aikido is an attitude about conflict, and someone whose life had no conflict in it might not be much affected. But for the rest of us, there's, you know, I mean, I haven't had a, you know, altercation in the subway, you know, car in Tokyo the way Terry Dobson did, that, you know, makes for such an obvious story. But it's just there, woven into everything.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's beautifully put, and we don't kind of realize on a day-to-day basis how it is shaping all our conversations and the way we navigate our way through life. And sometimes it takes a big event for you to realize, oh gosh, that would never have happened if I hadn't done that.
Mhm.
There was somebody who I within our association who I once went to do a weekend seminar for, and he said to me, well, when you got your grade, I thought that was a bit of a joke. But actually now I really see why you got it, because whenever I go into a bar, I always get into a fight, and I can see you never would.
Wow.
In a way, that said it all for me. He was right. I never get into a fight when I go into a bar. Yeah, I think it does. It changes the way you present yourself to the world, and therefore it shapes your journey.
Mhm.
I'm speaking of large events, you know, we got wars going on, right? And I think so much about my visits, 3 so far, to Poland and Ukraine, Western Ukraine, since the Russian invasion, and so clearly how dojos have been serving as community centers, resource centers, places where, you know, how do I find a house? How do I find a job? What do I do here? You know, and so many kids. I mean, you know, I've had hundreds of kids on the mat in Ukraine. It's amazing what the teachers there are doing and the adults there are doing through Aikido to feel, the word they use is normal, just to feel more like a normal human being, you know.
Mm.
And empowerment for kids, learning language when they're in new situations, making friends. Dojos and Aikido practice itself have been literal lifelines and lifesavers during the war there.
Mhm.
And one of the really difficult things, heartbreaking things in the Middle East, Rob mentioned, is that, you know, it's been harder to get Israelis and Palestinians together through Aikido. I think in their own practice, Israelis, and we do have some Palestinians training, Aikido has been very centering, very grounding, very calming, very helpful. So yeah, very applicable in these big situations.
Mhm. You know, not to delve too deep right now, but I think one of the more powerful aspects of Aikido that I understood after a while is sort of the training of our nervous system, right? Where when you're a beginner on the mat and someone first pretends to attack you, your whole fight or flight system, you're aroused, you're like, there's an attack coming. And after how many years do you have a calm, smooth response without any of that, right? So you've literally retrained your sympathetic nervous system not to overreact. And that makes a huge change in daily life in all kinds of realms. Which again, I don't think it's easy for us, as to Rob's point, to separate that anymore. After you've done it for so long, you can't really remember what life was like before that. But it's really inspiring to hear not only the stories of impact, but just to think about its power for good in what you're saying, Jamie. People with trauma, people in war zones.
I'm going to see what I can do about getting a few stories collected for the second edition, from there. And I'm thinking of two identical twin boys. I think they're 15 or 16 now. They were 14 when they literally fled Bucha. And if you all remember the slaughter at Bucha in Ukraine during not too long into the war. And they were really traumatized. And then they were getting bullied in Slovakia in their new home. And all of that has shifted, completely shifted for them. And, they're given like 80 or 90% of the credit to Aikido.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even one of my students is a man with Asperger's, and when he was a boy, he went through a lot, and he was, very angry about the bullying, and he came from a very, very difficult family circumstance as well, and he just talks about the way Aikido saved him, and how Aikido helped him deal with physical threats without causing harm in return, and how Aikido gave him the confidence and everything else, and he's remarkable. He'll tell you that he's autistic, but you wouldn't know it to interact with him. He's come so far because of Aikido.
It
It's really
sounds
amazing.
like he should be offering up a story to volume 2.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
I think I've covered at least 3 stories on this.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Quentin. Is there anything else you want to tell our audience before we close?
Hang on, Susan.
Oh, Richard. Yeah.
I have been diligently working to get Paul Linden online here. We've seen him click back in, but he was very grateful and excited to be a part of that first book, and was really honored to be a part of that, and just thinks it's a marvelous book, but wanted to pass on his hellos and thanks. And without the technical difficulties, he would be here, and can't say enough.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, he has something else. He's in my ear. What else, Paul? And he also has some future stories about the future developments of Parkinson's and Aikido. So you got more stories from him. I got some stories. You're going to be filled by the time this is up.
Just as well
But
I
everybody
was
else
there.
keeps sending them in. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Well, we need to share this recording so that just more people can contribute. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who've got stories. Thanks for doing this, Quentin.
Mhm. Yeah. So, any final thoughts? How can people get a hold of you? How can they send their stories to you?
Well, they can easily find me on Facebook.
Yes.
They can, if they just Google my name, I will fairly come up, the book being one reason. My email address is q.cook with an E at ntlworld.com.
NTL World.
Yes. So however people want to contact me, messenger, email, via Aiki extensions, I'm up for it.
And do you encourage them to just go ahead and send you a whole story, or tell you what their topic is?
They can send me a whole story, or they can talk to me first. I suppose it's worth saying actually that there were some people who wanted to tell a story but didn't necessarily want their name to go to it, because there were events in it that they didn't necessarily want to be connected with.
Mm.
It's not my story, it's their story. So I always felt it was really important to not have too hard and fast rules. There were preferences, but I wanted to always observe how they felt about it.
Okay, so you would even be open to a story that would be published as anonymous as one story
Yeah.
in your other book was?
Yeah.
Mhm. Great, that's good information to know.
But generously has donated proceeds from the book,
Mhm.
extensions into our AE work.
Yes, thank you for that, Quentin. Quentin, what Jamie's saying is that when people purchase the book, the money goes to Aiki Extensions to further our work in the world. And some of the things that we do, Jamie's been referencing, but we go into these places where there's high conflict. Ukraine, we've been to, long doing work in the Middle East. We try to help in those places by bringing people together, by teaching people how to calm their own bodies and ground and center. We have board members that do work with veterans. We have lots of work going on in the world, and we also provide seed grants and funding to organizations that are trying to start up some kind of Aiki extending activity or are already doing it and need some help. So all of those are things we do.
We provide a wonderful place to network with people who think like you do. So you can
Absolutely.
share ideas and support each other.
Yes. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you very much. I'm going to pause the recording, and thanks to our viewing audience.